By the time I was 26, I had a paid-off car, a condo in my name, and a bookkeeping firm that cleared $1.4 million in its third year of operation. No inheritance, no cosigner, no safety net that had anyone else's name on it. I want to be clear about that, because the story I'm about to tell you only makes sense if you understand where I started. My parents had my brother first, then me 2 years later, then my younger sister 3 years after that. My brother. I'll just call him my brother, because honestly, using his name feels like giving him more than he deserves right now, was the one my parents built their hopes around. He was small thunder and the red lavender of point my hearance at dinner to say things like, he has real potential. My sister was the baby. I was the one in the middle who figured out early that the middle was invisible and that invisible could actually be useful if you learned how to work with it. My mom worked in medical billing. My dad sold insurance. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. We were that specific kind of American broke, where you have a house and 2 cars and absolutely nothing in savings, and everyone is one bad month away from something terrible. I grew up watching my parents fight about money in the kitchen after they thought we were asleep. I grew up understanding that debt was a slow leak nobody wanted to talk about at the dinner table, so I got obsessed with numbers, not in a nerdy abstract way, in a survival way. I started doing the family's taxes when I was 16 because I found a mistake my dad had made 3 years in a row that was costing them almost $800 each time. I didn't announce it. I just fixed it, printed the corrected forms, and left them on the kitchen counter with the sticky note. My mom stared at me for a long moment and then said, "Where did you even learn to do this?" I told her the internet. She nodded like that made sense and went back to her coffee. I got a full scholarship to a state school, studied accounting, graduated with a 3.9, and went straight into a mid-sized firm in Columbus. I worked there for 2 years, saved aggressively. I was putting away 30% of every paycheck. Living with a roommate in a 2-bedroom that cost me $600 a month, and by the time I was 23, I had enough to register my own LLC and start pulling clients from the small business owners I'd been meeting through a local Chamber of Commerce group I joined on a whim. The first year, I made $340,000 in revenue. I cried in my car when I ran the numbers at year end. Not because it was glamorous money, it wasn't after overhead and taxes, but because I had built something that was entirely, undeniably mine. I bought my condo at 24. Cash offer, conventional loan, I put 30% down. I remember the closing and thinking my hands looked too young to be signing documents like this. The agent kept looking at me like she was waiting for a parent to walk in. Nobody walked in. I signed. I drove home to a place that had my name on the deed. My parents knew I was doing well. I didn't hide it, but I didn't parade it either. I helped out when I could. I covered my sister's college application fees without being asked. I sent my mom money 1 month when my dad had a health scare and they were short. I did it quietly, the way I'd always operated. Quiet didn't mean invisible to me anymore. Quiet meant I controlled the narrative. Then my brother's restaurant failed. He'd opened it the year before with money our parents had lent him, $60,000 that they pulled from their retirement account. My mom told me about the loan over the phone in a voice that had a specific flatness to it, the kind of flat that means the decision is already made and she knows it was probably a mistake. I didn't say anything. I'm not sure what I could have said. The restaurant lasted 14 months. A Southern fusion concept in a neighborhood that didn't have foot traffic yet, and a lease he'd signed at a rate that only made sense if you assumed the place would be packed every night from week 1. It wasn't packed. It struggled for month 3, and by month 10 he was calling our parents every week, asking for more. They sent what they could. I found out later they also put $22,000 on a credit card. When it finally closed, my brother moved back home. He was 30. Our parents were 61 and 63, with a gutted retirement account, credit card debt, and a son sleeping in the room that used to be his in high school. I felt bad for them. I genuinely did. I called my mom more often. I sent her a grocery gift card and didn't make a big deal about it. I thought we were all just quietly absorbing a hard thing as a family, the way families do. I was wrong about what kind of absorbing was happening. About 4 months after the restaurant closed, my dad called me on a Tuesday evening. He's not a phone call person. He texts one-word answers and communicates mostly through my mom. So when I saw his name on my screen, I picked up immediately. He told me they needed to talk to me about something serious. Could I come over that weekend? I said yes. I didn't ask what it was about. I figured it was something with their finances. Maybe they wanted advice. Maybe they needed a loan. I was already thinking about what I could offer without putting myself in a difficult position. I was already doing the math on their behalf. I drove to their house Saturday morning with coffee from the good place near my condo. My mom had made her breakfast casserole. My brother was there, sitting at the kitchen table with his arms crossed. My sister was there too, which I hadn't expected. She kept looking at the table. My dad waited until we were all sitting down, and then he slid a piece of paper across the table to me. I looked at it. Then I looked at him. Then I looked at him. Then I looked at the paper again. It was a list, itemized, typed out. Medical costs from my birth and early childhood, $14,200, $14,200. Childcare from ages 1 through 5, $38,000. Clothing and school expenses through age 18, $29,600. My portion of the household food costs, estimated over 18 years, $41,000. Summer activities, sports, miscellaneous, $18,700. The total at the bottom said $141,500. My dad said, "We need you to pay back what we spent raising you. Your brother needs a fresh start, and we're in a difficult position. You're the only one of the three of you who can actually help us right now." I remember the exact quality of the silence in that kitchen. The refrigerator was humming. My sister was still looking at the table. My brother was watching me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Not quite guilt, not quite defiance. Somewhere in between. I asked my dad if he was serious. He said yes. I asked if my brother and sister were also being presented with itemized invoices for the cost of raising them. My dad said their situations were different. I put my coffee down very carefully on the table. I said, "I need a minute," and I walked out the back door and stood in their backyard for a while, looking at the garden my mom has been cultivating for as long as I can remember, the little raised beds with the tomatoes and the herbs, and I tried to figure out what I was actually feeling. What I was feeling was not surprised, and that was the part that broke my heart a little. Not the ask itself, but the fact that somewhere in the back of my mind, I had been half expecting something like this. I came back inside. I sat back down. I said, "I'm not going to pay this." My dad said they weren't asking for the full amount all at once. They were open to a payment plan. I said, "That's not what I mean. I mean, I'm not going to pay any of it. You chose to have children. Providing for your children isn't a loan. There's no contract here. There's no legal obligation. What you've handed me is a list of what it cost to be my parents, and I'm not going to reimburse you for that." My mom started crying. My brother said something under his breath that I asked him to repeat, and he didn't. My dad said I was being selfish, that I had more than I needed, and they were struggling, and family takes care of family. I said, "I agree, and I've been taking care of this family quietly for years, but this is different. This is you telling me my childhood was a business transaction." I drove home. I didn't take the breakfast casserole when my mom tried to wrap some up for me. I sat in my car in their driveway for a few minutes before I pulled out, just breathing. I called my best friend when I got home. She's known me since college. She knows the full history, and she listened to the whole thing without interrupting and then said, "Okay, so now you need to protect yourself." She didn't say I was overreacting. She didn't tell me to consider their perspective. She just went straight to the practical, which is why I love her. I called my attorney the following Monday. I'd had one on retainer for my business for 2 years, contracts, liability stuff, general counsel, and I gave her the full picture. She told me what I already knew legally. There was no valid claim. Parents in the United States do not have a legal right to be reimbursed for child rearing expenses by their adult children. The document my dad had given me was not a binding contract. It was not a promissory note. It was not enforceable. She also told me that if they chose to pursue it through small claims or civil court, it would be dismissed. She said if that happened, I should counter for legal fees because nothing sharpens the other side's thinking like the possibility of paying your attorney bills. I felt steadier after that conversation. Not okay, steadier. There's a difference. 2 weeks later, I got a certified letter. My parents had retained an attorney. The letter outlined a contribution claim. The argument, such as it was, that I had benefited financially from my upbringing and owed a debt of gratitude with a dollar amount attached to it. Their attorney framed it around a theory I'd never heard of and which my attorney described to me as creative but completely without merit in Ohio. They were also asking for $40,000 for my brother, which they called equalization, the idea being that because they'd given him money and it had been lost, I owed him an equivalent amount from my business earnings. My sister, I noticed, was not mentioned. I think she refused to be part of it. She and I haven't talked about it directly, but she sent me a text around that time that just said, "I love you." I'm sorry, I still have it saved. Here is the thing, nobody tells you about being sued by your family. The legal part is almost the easy part. The hard part is what happens to you psychologically when the people who are supposed to be your foundation decide to treat you like an asset to be liquidated. I stopped sleeping well for about 3 weeks. I'd wake up at 2 a.m. and lie there replaying conversations from my childhood, looking for the moment I should have seen this coming, trying to figure out if I had missed something or if they had always been capable of this and I just hadn't wanted to know. I have a therapist. I've been seeing her for a couple of years, mostly for work stress, and she told me something during one of those sessions that I keep coming back to. She said, the grief isn't about the lawsuit. The lawsuit is just the thing that finally made visible what you already knew. I turned back to what I know, which is numbers and documentation. I spent 2 weekends going through 5 years of my business records. Not because my attorney told me to, she was handling the legal response, but because I needed to understand my own situation completely. I'd always run a tight operation, but I wanted to be certain there was nothing that could be used against me, nothing that could be characterized as financial misconduct or hidden income or anything that could give their attorney any traction. And that's when I found something that had nothing to do with my parents' lawsuit. My brother had been a consultant for my business. I had hired him, briefly, about 18 months earlier when I was trying to grow my client base and thought having someone handle initial sales calls might help. I paid him $3,200 over the course of 4 months. He didn't do much. We agreed it wasn't working, and I stopped using him. I had a simple independent contractor agreement. I issued a 1099, and that was the end of it. But when I looked at his public social media, which I'd stopped following but hadn't blocked, I found posts going back almost a year where he was telling people he was a partner in my firm, not an employee, not a contractor, a partner. He had apparently been using the association with my business and my business's name in some cases to solicit clients for a separate operation he was running. I had no idea. I had never authorized any of this. I had never made him a partner, and no documentation of any kind existed suggesting otherwise. I took screenshots. I had a friend help me archive the pages in case anything was deleted. Then I called my attorney. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "This changes things." We filed our response to their contribution claim, which was essentially a very detailed document explaining why the claim had no legal basis in Ohio and requesting dismissal with prejudice. We also filed a counterclaim for unauthorized use of my business name and for tortious interference because he had, in at least 2 documented cases, represented himself as a partner of my firm to people who were prospective clients of mine. And one of those people had chosen not to work with my firm based partly on information he'd provided. My attorney drafted a letter to their attorney that was, professionally speaking, quite something. I read it and felt something I hadn't felt in months, which was clarity. Their attorney went quiet for about 2 weeks. Then I found the other thing. My parents had, at some point over the past 3 years, filed for a small business tax credit related to my brother's restaurant. I only found out about this because my mom mentioned it once in passing during a phone call, and at the time I hadn't thought much of it. But when I was doing my own records review, I started thinking about the timeline and something felt off. So I asked my accountant, someone I trusted completely, had worked with for 4 years, to look into the public records around the restaurant's closure. What he found was that the tax credit they'd claimed was tied to investment losses, but the way it was filed suggested they had claimed losses they weren't entitled to, because the money they'd given my brother had been characterized differently in their personal returns than in the restaurant's final filing. It was the kind of thing that looked like a mistake, except it had happened 3 separate times over 2 years, which is the kind of pattern that stops looking like a mistake. I sat with that information for a long time. I want to be honest about what that felt like. It didn't feel like power. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like standing at the edge of something and knowing that once you stepped, you couldn't step back. I talked to my therapist. I talked to my attorney. I talked to my best friend, who sat across from me at my kitchen table with a glass of wine and said, "What do you actually want out of this?" I thought about it for a long time, and I said, "I want them to drop this. I want them to stop. And if they won't stop, then I want there to be consequences for what they've done. All of it, not just the lawsuit." I didn't report anything immediately. I gave them an opportunity first. Through my attorney, I communicated to their attorney that we were prepared to respond fully to their claim, including through discovery, and that discovery would involve examination of financial records, mine, and through our counterclaim, theirs. I didn't threaten anything specifically. I just made clear that we were prepared to be thorough. Their attorney asked for a 30-day pause in proceedings. I gave them 30 days. On the 28th day, I got a call from my attorney. Their attorney had reached out to say the family would be dropping the contribution claim in its entirety. No payment. No settlement. Dismissed with each side bearing their own costs. I told my attorney to get it in writing. We got it in writing. Then I reported the tax irregularities to the IRS. I want to be clear, I didn't report them as a weapon. I reported them because I'm an accountant, and I knew what I was looking at, and I believe in the thing that my profession is built on, which is that the numbers have to be right. If I let it go because they were my family, I would have been the kind of person I've spent my entire career refusing to be. I also sent a formal cease and desist to my brother regarding the unauthorized use of my business name and the misrepresentation of his role in my firm. I haven't spoken to my parents since the lawsuit was dropped. I've thought about it. I've turned it over in my head during runs and in the shower, and at 3 a.m. when the old insomnia comes back for a visit. I don't think reconciliation is impossible forever, but right now, in this season, I need distance, and I need to trust my own read on what's safe for me. My sister and I have lunch every few weeks. She doesn't talk about our parents much, and I don't push her. We talk about her job and my business and the shows we're watching, and sometimes we sit there and I think about how we grew up in the same house and ended up in completely different places in how we handled this, and I'm grateful for her. I'm grateful she sent that text. My business hit $1.7 million this past year. I hired 2 junior accountants and a part-time operations coordinator. I have a line of clients that keeps me busy in a way that feels purposeful rather than frantic. I went back to therapy more consistently for a while after all of this, and one of the things I worked on was separating my sense of safety from my financial position, because I had used the money and the condo and the firm as evidence that I would be okay. And that's not the worst thing, but it's not the whole thing either. You can have everything you've worked for and still need to learn how to feel safe without keeping score. My therapist asked me once if I thought my parents ever actually understood what they had done. Not legally, just whether they knew. I said I wasn't sure. I said I thought maybe they had convinced themselves that because they needed the money, the ask was justified. That need can be a very powerful justifier. She asked how I felt about that. I said, I feel sad about it. I feel sad that the version of my parents I needed, the ones who would have just been proud of me without wanting something back, I don't know that those people exist. And I've had to figure out how to grieve someone who's still alive, which is its own specific kind of hard. I'm not telling this story because I want anyone to feel sorry for me. I have a good life. I built it. I know how to keep building it. I'm telling it because I know there are people watching this who have handed money to family members who then turned around and treated them like an ATM, who have been the successful one, and felt the specific weight of what that title costs when the people around you stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a resource, who have been handed an invoice for their own childhood and didn't know what to do with it. Here's what I know. You do not owe anyone the cost of raising you. You do not owe your family the fruits of work they had no part in. Love is not a contract. Parenthood is not a business investment that entitles anyone to a return. And if they come after what you've built, document everything, call an attorney, and do not apologize for knowing your own worth. They didn't destroy me. They just showed me, finally and completely, exactly what I was dealing with. And once I knew that, I knew exactly what to do. I've thought a lot about what actually happened in that kitchen. Not the legal version of it. I know that story inside and out. I mean the human version. My dad sliding that piece of paper across the table. My mom's casserole sitting in the middle of everything, going cold. My brother's arms crossed, watching me read. What strikes me now is that nobody in that room thought they were doing something wrong. That's the part I had to sit with for a long time. They had convinced themselves that need justifies the ask, that love means access, that because I had built something, they were entitled to a portion of it, not because they helped build it, but simply because they existed in relation to me. And I think that's worth naming clearly, not to be harsh, but because I've talked to enough people since then to know that this specific dynamic, the successful one being treated as a family ATM, is far more common than anyone wants to admit out loud. Here's what I actually believe about how this all unfolded. The choices people make have weight. Not in a cosmic, mystical sense, just in the plain, practical sense that what you put into motion tends to keep moving. My parents made choices for years. They poured resources into my brother's dream without a plan, without accountability, without asking hard questions. My brother made choices. He borrowed a business's credibility. He had no right to borrow. He misrepresented himself. He let it go on for months. And I made choices too, to build carefully, to document everything, to never cut corners even when corners would have been easier. When their claim fell apart, it wasn't luck. It was the natural result of what each of us had actually done. The records I kept made me defensible. The records they kept made them vulnerable. That's not fate. That's just the math of integrity compounding over time. The thing about moral courage, and I think that's genuinely what this required, is that it doesn't feel brave when you're in it. It feels like a stomach ache. It feels like waking up at 2 a.m. and staring at the ceiling and asking yourself whether you're doing the right thing or just the hard thing or both. What I had to learn slowly through all of it was that staying honest about what I saw in the tax records, in my brother's social media posts, in the pattern of what my parents had filed wasn't cruelty, it was integrity. And integrity doesn't get to take days off just because the stakes are personal. I also think about my sister, who sent that text and showed up to those lunches and never once asked me to choose between my protection and my family. Quiet decency is underrated. She knew what was right without making it a performance, and that taught me something about the kind of person I want to be in relation to the people who actually show up for me. If you are the person in your family who built something on your own, who did the work, kept the records, made the hard calls, you are allowed to protect what you built. You are not obligated to fund someone else's recovery at the cost of your own stability. That is not coldness. That is the honest application of what you actually earned. And if they come for it anyway, document everything. Trust what you know. Don't mistake guilt for obligation. The numbers, in the end, always tell the truth.